from the British Geological Survey. Tom, over to yourself. Round of applause.
Thanks very much. So this talk's going to be a real whistle-stop tour of I think some interesting developments in the kind of tools around how we think about resources and how we manage resources. I'm not going to go into any detail. So if you're interested in this, please check out either get in touch with me or check out the UNECE, United Nations Economic Initiative for Europe website. Or indeed, actually, I think I spoke about this in more detail, some of these things in more detail in a previous talk I did for this event in last year, the year before. So I'm sure it's available online. Mm-hmm. I think the previous speaker, one thing they said that really resonated with me is thinking about how the world has changed in recent years. And I think with regard to how we think about resources, the way society explores mineral resources and use them really is going a fundamental change, which is exciting and challenging in equal measure. And in part, I think this is really driven by the rapid increase in demand from materials that were considered quite minor in the past for things, and uses for technologies to enable decarbonisation, batteries, renewables, etc., which has really resulted in increased supply demands from national governments and also consumers for increased transparency in supply chains and also increased scrutiny in ensuring supply chains remain secure and robust and meet sustainability objectives. So I've included a little quote here from the UK government net zero strategy, and I could have included something very similar from any number of recent policy documents from various national governments or the European Union. And you can see here, I think this is really interesting, the fact that this is a very high level government policy document, and it specifically mentions some very kind of actually quite niche things regarding mineral supply, around traceability, around ESG, and around mining. Now 5-10 years ago, there's no way I would expect this sort of high-level policy document to kind of really get into this type of detail. But this is really commonplace nowadays. And I think we're kind of we need to deal with that. We need to be cognizant of that, and we need to make sure we've got the tools in place to make sure we can deliver that. So within this context, I'm going to talk about some tools that have been developed by, say, the UN Economic Commission for Europe that I think are really useful in the context of maintaining sustainable supply. I should probably say, I mean, this is in no way an official capacity for UNECE. I'm just someone who's a user of these things, and I think they're quite useful. So, I'm keen to sort of share these around a little bit. And if you are, interested in the official word, please check out their website where there's lots of documents. So specifically, these are the United Nations Framework Classification and the United Nations Resource Management System. So the UNFC, the first one, is a classification framework for resources, which aims to classify a very wide range of resources, including energy and also including anthropogenic resources. So going back to kind of that thing about recycling earlier, in a consistent way. So, we just heard a talk about JORC, we've heard mention of Crisco and things. Now, this is a kind of similar-ish thing, it's a similar classification, but this isn't necessarily aimed so much at investors. I think this is a bit more aimed at kind of national governments. A kind of bigger picture includes a lot more stuff. A lot's been said about this. I haven't really got time to go into detail, but again, I did talk about this in a previous talk, so I've done for this, and there's a lot of information online. The differences between them all. But we've also got a new thing. We've got, say, this United Nations Resource Management System, the UNRMS. Now, this is a framework to act as a holistic management tool for raw materials across the entire supply chain. So, this is something quite new, a new way of thinking about things, sort of systems thinking approach. And I think it's really important to recognise this isn't developing this isn't about developing shiny new things that some magic new tool that will save us all. And I put that little cartoon in. I saw that recently, and it made me laugh. And I think this is something that a lot of people will see and recognise from their own field. And I think this is possibly something that's happened to ESG standards and tools as well. And we can probably all think of examples of this. This is really about ensuring that existing standards and frameworks can be compared, that they align, and the new ones that I think will inevitably come due to enhanced kind of needs for data to meet the goals of the SDGs and the circular economy and decarbonisation agenda work effectively together. So very, very quickly, UNFC, if you don't know, if you have not come across it before, this is what it looks like. It's a classification system that relies on 3 separate axes for different aspects of project development, which are environmental and social, technical feasibility, and also confidence. And this is the geological confidence in terms of minerals data. But obviously, like I said, this is designed to sort of span many different resources, so it's quite generic. So essentially, you ascribe a value of 1 to 3 or 4 for each of these 3 axes, and this gives you a final classification. So although the UNFC has been around for really quite a long time, I think it's only now reaching mainstream acceptance and use. So for many, especially in the mining industry, I would say that it's something that really probably should be on your radar. I don't imagine it'll, replace the many robust and comprehensive industry standards like JORC or PERC or, these things we've heard about today anytime soon for stock exchange reporting. Personally, I don't really think it's necessarily about that so much. It's something quite different. However, the European Commission are really, keen on its implementation. I think this is something that really will become much more widespread for reporting on national level in the future. Over the last 3 years alone, it's gone from being quite a niche application in Europe to something that's been referenced in numerous policy and strategy documents, and I think probably will be mandated for EU data in the near future. In Africa, you've got the AMREC, the African Minerals, Resources and Energy Classification, which is very, very similar, which is required for reporting to African stock exchanges. So this is really relevant for projects in the African Union. Now here it's actually been used in some real world applications, and it's been used to compare the benefits and environmental credentials across several different projects, which has been a really interesting case study. And that's been used to actually practically make planning decisions. So, this is something that's out there, it's been practically used, and it should be quite useful. So the next thing, we've got the United Nations Resource Management System. Now, this is a very conceptual thing. So this is very, very vague what I'm about to say here, although I think it's super interesting. Several case studies are being developed, but it's something that's not really been, I say, practically implemented yet, still very much in development. This is a concept for a holistic framework for effective management of raw materials across the entire value chain through from extraction to recycling, reuse, or disposal. Now, it's based on kind of 12 separate principles, which you can see here, and this incorporates kind of circularity, decarbonisation, rights, lots of ESG aspects. So I think it's really relevant to lots of things we're going to be talking about today. It incorporates the UNFC, but has a much wider context. So you can kind of see here, on the side there, you've got the kind of the extract, the bit that as a geologist, I'm used to thinking about the kind of resource aspect. But moving forward, I think, we need to think about this in a more holistic way, as we kind of discussing earlier, about how perhaps the processing, the manufacturing, the use phase also factors into this. And, can we perhaps do these things better as well and make efficiencies here? And how does that implement the mining? So, we need tools to kind of incorporate all this and incorporate the data for all this in one way, so we can kind of compare really and understand. And I think there's a lot of talk earlier about understanding and seeing the truth of these things. And I think, there's a real importance at the moment to develop these models to understand the physical stocks and flows of how these systems work. And it's really hard to do. And I don't think it's something that, is well established at the moment. So this is, I think, a tool to kind of try to do this to some extent. So how might this kind of work out in the real world? Now, so I think there is a traceability, I think, is something that's mentioned a lot. There's a growing demand for these complex resource management systems from government policy, consumers, and investors. And I think in some ways we're running before we can walk in this respect. There is this demand in policy. In fact, things like the EU Batteries Directive, it mandates these sorts of things. But we don't really have particularly well-established systems on how to deal with this yet. So I see the kind of UNRMS as something very similar to it, really important we continue to be able to maintain supplies of raw materials that we need for decarbonisation, and fits in with the circular economy agenda. I don't think we quite realise it yet, but systems like this, they are already mandated in policy for things like, battery passports, material passports. Equally, the various conflict minerals legislation requires reporting on where resources are sourced from. In these supply chains, this is really, really complicated, and we need to think about systems about how we can do this. And I think, thinking about these sorts of things in this way is useful. This could be a useful tool here. And if nothing else, it may help to standardize and unify the many, many existing sustainability and traceability schemes, frameworks, and standards that are already out there or might be developed. So if nothing else, this may well be a useful international umbrella to kind of, help us unify these things, which I think is something that's perhaps very difficult and challenging at the moment. So going back to something a bit more practical, a bit more tangible, go back to UNFC and how this might help to sustainability. So in terms of kind of how we can use this to kind of ensure better sustainability and raw material sourcing, the environmental and social considerations are really given a great deal of predominance in the UNFC classification. They're hard baked into a very early stage of the classification process. In this sort of axes here, and perhaps in a way that traditionally other standards didn't cover particularly well, although we've heard today about updates that are really kind of getting on top of this and really thinking about these aspects now as well. And I think this is really, really important moving forward. I think the prominence of ESG aspects has become really critical for resource development and how we think about resource development. I think historically, especially perhaps within the UK and Europe, exploration for new product development has been undertaken by geologists, who just want to look at rocks. They perhaps little consideration regarding early community engagement, and I'm certainly guilty of that myself. But we're now seeing this situation in much of Europe, especially, where minerals development is really, really difficult due to this lack of social license to operate and a lack of, and a great amount of community opposition. And I think a lot of the time this is due to perhaps a failure of really early engagement by individuals with the relevant skills and expertise within the exploration and development process. And perhaps things like use of UNFC or use of these kind of updated codes which are more cognizant of the ESG aspects are really required to make sure that we have a very clear process for incorporating the ESG aspects for the really, really early stages of project development, sort of boots on the ground, the first time we kind of really think about these, to make sure that we kind of overcome these social license to operate and these community opposition issues. So very, very quickly, to sum up, I think, there is a need for these more holistic resource management systems and a sort of a need to really change the way we perhaps think about these and much better understand these systems if we are going to secure sustainable supplies. We need to much better understand national levels of data, generate these kind of much larger resource management systems. And I think the tools that UNFC develop certainly fit a niche here and are really useful. And if it's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to get in touch with me, have a look at the UNECE website, or have a look at the many tool resources out there to kind of use these things, because I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it and looking at it, and they are very useful. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. Absolutely fantastic. A round of applause from everybody on the other side of our muted microphones. Absolutely fantastic. Great. So Tom, just one question from me, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to keep moving just in terms of timing this morning. So we heard earlier on from Jill updates that are going on in JORC, and then the whole host of alphabet soup in terms of all of those disclosure codes, etc., that are out there. Where's that linkage between everything you've just described with everything that's going on with those codes? Are you all speaking to one another and sharing all of this good practice, or are there opportunities for enhancement, shall we say, with regards to that relationship?
Well, I'm sure. I mean, there's always opportunities for enhancement. Like I said earlier, I'm not officially involved in the sort of development of these UN tools, but I'm aware of the various committees that are, and they certainly speak to people, on CRISCO and on the PERT committees, and they certainly have an involvement. I think it's important to understand that perhaps, well, as far as I'm concerned, these are different tools that have different niches. But I think there needs to be an alignment, and I think everyone recognises that now. I think there's no doubt everyone involved in the process recognises now, and people are talking to each other, which is great. And there's all these questions about sort of competent persons and things like that, and I think there is really good communication between different organisations, and that's very heartening, and I'm quite optimistic about the process, really. So, these discussions are happening, but perhaps above my level. But I know, I'm aware they are happening.
Brilliant, thanks, Tom. Jill, do you have any comments on that, just in terms of everybody speaking to one another?
Yeah, look, I fully agree that we all do need to be aligned, and as I said, that was a very early realisation of our working group that we don't have to have exactly the same guidance, but we do need to understand where the linkages are, and so I think collaboration is super important. So yep, fully agree.
Awesome, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for that really brilliant update with regards to where everything's got to. And we posted the link to your previous talk from 2 years ago into the chat. So if you want a whole 40 minutes of updates from Tom, you know where to get them. The link from 2 years ago is already there, and then this video will be made available very shortly. So awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. Absolutely brilliant.